This is AM Joy, January 3rd, 2018.
He'll have plenty of free time next week for a visit to Capitol Hill. He'll be testifying in a closed session before the House Intelligence Committee on Tuesday, according to what two sources told NBC News. The Daily Beast reports that Bannon has lawyered up in preparation for his interview with the same attorney who's also representing White House counsel Don McGahn and former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. And joining us now, California Representative Ted Lieu, Kurt Bardella, former Breitbart media consultant, and still here with me is Malcolm Nance. So, Congressman, I'm going to start with you. What do you think Congress could, in theory, get out of Steve Bannon, who famously in the book by Michael Wolff exempted himself from being in any contact with Russians?
Thank you, Jory, for that question. Let me first say that I believe high-level Trump associates, including potentially the president himself, are in increasing legal jeopardy. And that's because insiders have turned on them. We already know that Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos have flipped and are cooperating with the special counsel. And now we know that Steve Bannon is going to fully cooperate, those are his words, with House investigators. And this is at a time when Steve Bannon has been abandoned by the president and his allies. So we all look forward to what he's going to say.
And you know, Kurt, it's interesting because Steve Bannon, the Michael Wolff book, it is fascinating. And one of the fascinating things is the extent to which Steve Bannon sort of gives himself credit for kind of creating Donald Trump, as if Donald Trump sort of sprang out of his own imagination. You now have Donald Trump in this recent Wall Street Journal interview saying he feels betrayed. I feel betrayed because you're not supposed to do that, meaning talk on the record, and asked if the split was permanent. He said, we'll see what happens. That sounds like Donald Trump doesn't think they're necessarily split permanently. And I wonder if you think that Bannon does think it's permanent and that he's now ready to torch Donald Trump in front of that committee.
Boy, it's a very interesting yin and yang you have going on here. Donald Trump perhaps realizing that dancing on Steve Bannon's grave so publicly may not serve his interest if he's talking to investigators, talking to Russia. And you got to believe at some point, if he hasn't already, he'll be talking to Mueller for that investigation. Maybe it might be worth for Donald Trump to throw a nugget out there that, well, maybe reconciliation is possible to try and elicit some sort of loyalty from Steve, who's made it very clear that, I mean, he's not going to go down to protect Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka, or Jared Kushner, as very publicly he hates them. So I think Steve is going to try to walk this balance of providing information and insight into what he believed and he said to Michael Wolff was treasonous activity, but also trying to find a way to protect the president and get back in his good graces, because ultimately, Joy, Steve's lease on life politically is tied to Donald Trump, and he needs Donald Trump in order to have any attempt at regaining political relevancy or influence again. Yeah,
and at the same time, Malcolm, you know, it is interesting. I mean, Bannon is I believe he's a Navy man. I believe he did have a military career for a little while. And while he is, you know, a white nationalist and in a lot of ways incredibly vile, it was interesting hearing him describe Donald Trump Jr.'s actions in meeting with Russians to get dirt from a foreign adversary to help the campaign as treasonous. Because he has nothing in his self-interest to say that. Does that make him an interesting potential person to testify to Bob Mueller?
You know, if I were to equate this to the Valerie Plame trial, back when Scooter Libby had outed Valerie Plame and the vice president was aware of it, I would put Steve Bannon in the Karl Rove unindicted co-conspirator role. That's, you know, as you might recall, Karl Rove didn't go to jail. Right. Scooter Libby did. So in this case, I think that Bannon has been hedging his bets the entire time, knowing this information. And the question is, when he goes in before the House Intelligence Committee, will he view the House Republicans, because he'll ignore the Democrats, will he view the House Republicans as providing him ample cover for him to not say anything? Or, as you said, will he burn Donald Trump to the ground? I don't believe that he'll burn Trump to the ground. I think he'll try to, you know, sort of finesse the questions to the point where he can assist Trump in, you know, covering up whatever crimes may have occurred during the time that he was there. But I think Jared Kushner, I don't think he'll spare Jared Kushner any favors at all during his testimony. But Donald Trump Jr., he may just play stupid and say that he just doesn't know.
Yeah, his apology was very focused on Donald Trump Jr. But it is interesting because Donald Trump, whether he wants to wall himself off in this book or not, he really can't. Michael Wolff is literally everywhere. And here is Michael Wolff on Hardball on Tuesday describing the way Bannon really feels about Donald Trump. Take a listen.
The president at this moment in time was much stronger than Steve Bannon thought he would be. I think Steve anticipated my book would appear, and that would begin to precipitate his break with Donald Trump, who frankly he thinks is an idiot.
And you know, Congressman Lieu not only thinks is an idiot, but tucked in the Friday New York Times story about Donald Trump and Steve Bannon's break was this very intriguing information that in 2015, Steve Bannon and Peter Schweitzer, who you'll recall was the guy who wrote Clinton Cash, which was the book full of lies about the Clintons that the New York Times sucked up and turned into news fodder to help push along conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton. That same team produced a dossier about Donald Trump. And that New York Times story specifically said that that dossier was about, quote, mob ties. Is it now time for Congress, for these relevant committees, to subpoena that dossier to find out what Steve Bannon dug up on Donald Trump?
Absolutely, and that's a great point. And when you look at the Fusion GPS testimony that Senator Feinstein released, there's a lot in there about organized crime and connections potentially to Donald Trump. So I think that's a great point, Joy, that you made. And also, I think it's important to note that after their Fire and Fury book came out, Steve Bannon's regret statement did not say that he didn't say what he said.
Right.
He just regretted what he said. So I think in the House intel testimony, it's going to be hard for him to walk back any of his words because he has not done that at all.
Exactly. And, you know, Kurt, does it surprise you that Bannon, who, you know, he had Trump on his radio show frequently in 2015, obviously he was trying to bring him along and make him more like Jeff Sessions and sort of push along his natural racial proclivities to turn that into potential policy. But does it surprise you that he also investigated Donald Trump? Or that Schweitzer, his partner, did?
I remember at the time during the Republican presidential primary, the run-up to Clinton Cash, that they were very focused on really, their plan was to come up with dirt on every single candidate and to release tidbits throughout the entire Republican primary. And I think that in the beginning, I don't think anyone really thought, including Steve Bannon, that Donald Trump would win the Republican primary and go on to be president. I think that he thought this will be entertaining, this will be great for a lot of eyeballs, it'll be great for Breitbart to use Donald Trump to cater to their audience. But he wasn't invested necessarily from day one in the idea that Trump was going to be the guy and that he would find himself at his right hand entering the White House. So they had dirt, they were trying to get dirt on every candidate because what they wanted at the time, their priority was getting attention on Breitbart, to try to make Breitbart the main primary conversation driver of the Republican presidential primary. Now, over time, that really shifted and changed as it became clear that Trump was going to be more than just a fly-by-the-night sideshow and become a legitimate, credible candidate, I guess we'll call it. And so Steve and his parties began to shift, and hence that dossier on Trump went nowhere after a certain point. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, and if that intel, you know, is held, you know, because it is interesting, Malcolm. You had, you know, so the Russian part of it, where they were communicating with somebody inside of the campaign. It looks like it was sort of focused on trying to compel Donald Jr. And Jared Kushner. In your view, just from an intelligence point of view, would it be logical that then they would have been communicating with Bannon and that Bannon might actually have material information?
I've said this from the very beginning, Joy, way back in September 2016. There were multiple Russian teams making multiple contact with multiple individuals within the Trump campaign and around the Trump campaign in order to shape the narrative that they wanted pressed. And it apparently was very successful. You know, they seem to always get what they want in the end. And, you know, and they have people around them who are trying to work in their interest.
Yeah.
Bannon, on the other hand, had, you know, as you know, was also on the board of Cambridge Analytica, along with Jared Kushner, and they themselves could possibly be the bridge between Russian social media collection and targeteering against American citizens in voting in the 3 states where the election was held. One last note. You note that Mueller brought on a cyber prosecution specialist to investigate just acts like that.
Yep. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It's very interesting. Congressman Ted Lieu, Kurt Bardella, Malcolm Nance, thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. More AM Joy after the break.